She wasn't yelling. She wasn't running. She wasn't even standing. She was just sitting, a black woman in a hoodie on a park bench, reading Toni Morrison, waiting for her tea to cool, and somehow that was enough to call the police. This is not a made-up story. This is not a what if. This is America, and this is the story of what happened when a system built on perception tried to bury the wrong woman. The cops thought she was a threat. The public thought she was a scandal. Even the court she served tried to pretend she was a problem to be solved quietly. But what none of them realized, the woman in the hoodie was Judge Autumn Mason. And the moment they cuffed her, they didn't just arrest a person. They awakened a story more powerful than silence, more dangerous than protest, and more enduring than shame. This is a story about how being black in America means defending your identity before you're allowed to prove your innocence. It's a story about how a hoodie, a simple cotton hoodie, became a symbol of everything they feared and everything she never apologized for. But most of all, it's a story about what happens when you stop asking to be seen and start walking like the room belongs to you anyway. If you've ever been judged for how you dress, how you look, or where you sit, this story is yours too. If you've ever been told to quiet down, blend in, or take the safe path, this story is the one they hoped you'd never hear. This is they mocked the black woman in the park, then met the judge behind the hoodie. Welcome to Silent Power Stories, and welcome to the story they couldn't silence. The morning air in Lakemont was crisp, the kind of sharp chill that hinted autumn had finally chased summer out of town for good. The leaves along the river trail had turned, the oaks bleeding orange, the maples catching fire in gold. And people came out in layers and laughter, filling the park with a kind of weekend joy that looked great in postcards. Autumn Mason didn't come for joy. She came for stillness. Same bench, same time. Same hoodie pulled over her head. Not out of rebellion, but ritual. It was deep green and plain, slightly worn at the edges. She'd had it since law school. It didn't say anything, which is why she wore it. No brand, no college crest, just a hoodie. And in Lakemont, Colorado, a hoodie on a black woman told more stories than any sweatshirt ever should. She sat alone as usual at the bench closest to the pond. A thick book rested on her lap, Toni Morrison this week, and her fingers gently tapped the edge of the hardback cover as she read. Her face was calm, framed by the shadow of the hood, eyes slow scanning each line like they were secrets meant only for her. To most passers-by, she was invisible, a shape in the corner of a postcard, a ghost in the crowd, and she preferred it that way. Autumn had no need for attention. She'd spent her whole adult life ducking it. Even in courtrooms where her name was on the plaque, where the lawyer stood when she entered, she avoided spectacle. She let her work speak, not her volume. That Saturday morning was supposed to be just another quiet chapter in her ritual. But silence has a way of drawing attention, especially when you're black, especially when you're still, especially when you're wearing a hoodie. The sound came out of nowhere. Tires screeching, a sharp, abrupt arrival that cracked through the calm like a whip. A white police cruiser pulled up beside the curb, close to the jogging trail entrance. A couple of heads turned. One child stopped mid-bounce on her pogo stick. The park didn't usually get drama before noon. Autumn didn't look up. She turned the page. Two officers stepped out. White, tall, one heavy in the gut, the other angular with a jaw tight like a pit bull on a leash. They scanned, locked eyes. And then came the walk, straight down the trail, past the joggers, past the young white couple pushing a stroller, past the group of teenagers loitering near the stone bridge. Their eyes landed on her, the only black person sitting alone. She looked up slowly, finally acknowledging the disturbance. Her eyes met theirs and she saw what was coming before they even spoke. Ma'am, one of them barked, not unkindly, but not gently either. Can we talk with you a second? Autumn's heart didn't race. She just closed the book, marked the page with an old train ticket, set it beside her on the bench. Of course, she said, her voice even. We received a call about suspicious behavior in the park, said the heavy-set one, adjusting his belt. Mind telling us what you're doing here? Autumn blinked. Reading. He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. You come here often? Almost every Saturday. Alone? Usually. Can we see some ID? That was the shift. Autumn knew it. She felt it like static in the air before a storm. Their tone wasn't investigative, it was performative. They weren't curious, they were building a narrative. Is there a reason you need my ID? She asked, her voice still calm, though her pulse had quickened slightly. Just protocol, said the other. The pit bull. His voice was clipped. You matched a vague description from the caller. It's nothing personal. She almost smiled. The oldest line in the book. Still, she reached slowly into her bag, removed her wallet, and handed over the license. One of the officers stared at it longer than needed. Read it aloud, slow. Autumn Mason, he said, voice tilting upward like the name didn't belong to her. You live around here? She nodded. 4 blocks west. What do you do? I work downtown. The pit bull tilted his head. What kind of work? I'm a judge. That made them pause, just for a moment. The heavy one laughed, short and unsure. You don't look like a judge. She raised one brow, hoodie still up. And what do judges look like? Neither of them answered. The silence between them grew heavier than the autumn air. The pit bull shifted his weight, clearly irritated. His hand moved closer to his belt. Not his gun, not yet, but close enough that Autumn noticed. The other officer rubbed the back of his neck, as if trying to decide whether this was still a routine check or something more. Autumn could feel the tension turning. She had seen this kind of pivot before, not in parks but in courtrooms, when an officer's assumptions were challenged, when a witness didn't break, when a defendant knew their rights too well, and she knew exactly where this could go. I'm not breaking any laws by sitting in a public park, she said evenly, and unless I'm being detained, I'll be going back to my reading. That was it. The shift completed. Don't get smart with us, the heavy one snapped, suddenly louder than necessary. Autumn didn't flinch. You just said I matched a vague description, she replied, which is not a legal basis for detention. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I suggest calling your supervisor. That suggestion stung. People nearby had started to pay attention now. A woman walking her golden retriever paused by the pond. A father holding a toddler turned his head from the playground. Eyes were shifting toward the scene. Phones, too. And Autumn? She sat as still as ever, not combative, not meek, just present. It was the kind of presence they weren't trained to handle. The pit bull officer stepped forward, posture suddenly forceful. You're resisting. Autumn's voice dropped, low and calm. I'm not. I'm asserting my rights. You're escalating. I haven't moved. But it didn't matter, because their narrative had already been set in motion, and now they needed her to fit inside it. The heavy officer reached out, took her arm, firmly. Autumn looked down at his hand on her coat sleeve. I'd advise you to remove your hand before you do something illegal, she said, quietly enough that only he could hear it. But he didn't. Instead, the other one moved behind her, and within seconds, the cold bite of metal was around her wrists. Gasps rose around the park. Someone shouted, "What's going on?" Another, "She didn't do anything." But the officers were in performance mode now. They said things loudly, things meant to justify. Stop resisting. We've got a situation. She's not cooperating. And still, Autumn said nothing. Her eyes scanned the crowd as she was led away, until she met a pair of wide brown ones. A teenage girl, maybe 16, held up her phone, filming. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were locked on Autumn. For one brief second, the two women looked at each other. Autumn didn't say a word, but she nodded, barely. Keep filming. It was a silent instruction, a plea, a promise. The back of the cruiser smelled like old vinyl and dried fear. Autumn sat stiff, wrists cuffed behind her, the bench seat sticky with age and use. The door slammed shut, and for the first time in the last 20 minutes, no one was looking at her. She was no longer a suspect in a park. She was just a body in a system, her hoodie bunched around her neck. The book had been left behind on the bench. Morrison's words torn from her hands like they were contraband. She turned her face toward the window, watching the trees blur past. They had no idea who they'd just arrested, and that's what scared her the most. Autumn wasn't afraid for herself, not in the way they assumed, not in the way that made people beg or cry or plead. She was afraid of what it meant, again, to be unseen, to be misjudged, to be black in a hoodie and therefore suspicious. It didn't matter that she'd passed the bar at 24, or that she'd argued before the Colorado Supreme Court, or that she'd spent years mentoring young law students from underserved neighborhoods. None of it mattered in that moment, because she was a black woman sitting alone. And someone called the cops, that's all it took. When they pulled into the station, the officers didn't say much. They walked her in through the back like she was dangerous, like she was unpredictable. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with bureaucratic rhythm. Booking, processing, fingerprints, a mugshot. She didn't speak. Not when they mocked the name on her license. Not when they asked if she wanted to call a lawyer. Not even when they asked her to remove her hoodie. She just watched and memorized. The holding cell was cold in that particular way. City jail cells are cold, not because of temperature, but because of design. It was engineered discomfort. The walls were a dirty shade of off-white, the kind that made time feel slower. The bench she sat on was hard metal, attached to the wall, with scratches like ghost stories carved by others who had sat there before. Autumn Mason sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, hoodie still on. She stared at the floor, unmoving. But her mind was on fire. She was replaying everything. The questions, the grip on her arm, the smug tone, the cuffs. She remembered the names on the badges, the way they looked at her like they'd already written the ending to her story. She filed every detail like evidence. Not because she was afraid, but because she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. They thought they'd caught a suspect. What they'd really done was give her the perfect case. Hours passed, no food, no water, just silence and the occasional buzz of a passing radio. She didn't ask for a phone call, didn't demand her rights. She simply waited, because she knew something they didn't. Patience is power when you know what's coming next. Finally, a door clicked. A young officer, nervous, barely 25, stepped into the room holding a clipboard. Miss Mason?" She raised her eyes, slowly, calmly. "You've been, processed. Charged with obstructing and resisting. You'll be arraigned Monday morning." He said it like a line he'd memorized, not something he believed. Autumn tilted her head slightly. "On what grounds?" The officer blinked. I don't know, ma'am. That's just the file." He cleared his throat and turned to leave. She was released on her own recognizance. No apology, no explanation. Just a silent escort to the lobby and the cold click of the front door unlocking. The night air hit her skin like a slap, icy and sharp. The city looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because she had seen one more layer of its truth. Across the street, parked under a flickering lamppost, was a gray sedan. The window rolled down halfway. "Autumn," a voice called. It was Marissa, her closest friend, a civil rights attorney who could smell injustice a mile away. Marissa jumped out and wrapped Autumn in a tight hug. "Are you okay? What the hell happened?" Autumn nodded, but it wasn't a real answer. They got in the car. drove in silence for a few blocks. Marissa kept looking over, waiting. Finally, Autumn broke the silence. They didn't know who I was. Marissa glanced at her. And now? Autumn looked out the window, her voice steady. They will. Back home, Autumn stood under the hot shower for a long time. Let the water run over her hoodie before finally peeling it off like a second skin. She hung it on the doorknob like a statement. Then she went to her home office. She sat at the desk and opened her laptop. Fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just writing a complaint. She was drafting a motion, a statement, a war cry dressed in legalese. Names, times, descriptions, violations, statutes, everything. She wasn't going to shout on social media. She didn't need a hashtag. Her voice would be heard where it mattered, on the record. The next morning, she made 2 calls. One to the District Judicial Ethics Board, the other to the State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. By noon, the phones in the Lakemont Police Department were already ringing. On Monday morning, Autumn Mason didn't walk into court as a defendant. She walked in through the judge's entrance, past security, past the benches, past the whispers, and took her place behind the bench in courtroom 4B. Robe on, gavel ready, same eyes, same voice, same woman who sat quietly on a bench 3 days ago. And the 2 officers from the park? They were now seated at the defense table, charged with unlawful detention, misuse of authority, and false reporting. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale, because now they knew what the hoodie had hidden. Not a threat, not a suspect, but a judge. And Autumn? She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She read the report calmly, methodically, like the hundreds she'd read before. But when she looked up from the file, she locked eyes with the pit bull, the same man who had tightened the cuffs on her wrist without reason. And she asked only one question. Do you recognize me now? The Monday after the arrest, Autumn Mason walked into the courthouse just before 8 a.m. No robe this time, no courtroom. Just a crisp charcoal blazer, a navy blouse, and those same black slacks she wore the day they booked her. But now they were pressed, immaculate, like the steel in her eyes. She walked with that controlled stillness only years of practice could sharpen. People moved around her, as always. Secretaries balancing coffee and files, bailiffs catching up on weekend gossip, attorneys on their phones. She passed them like mist, not unseen, just unbothered. Her name was back on the courtroom assignment board, Judge Mason, courtroom 4B, but her mind wasn't on the docket. Her mind was still in the park. Not on the arrest, not anymore. That had become evidence. She had filed the official misconduct complaint and submitted body cam footage requests before the sun even rose. The process had started. No, what stayed with her was something deeper. The first moment, the look, that flash of recognition, or rather assumption, when the officers saw her in the hoodie, sitting alone. That was the first strike, and it wouldn't be the last. It began again that afternoon like clockwork. She was in the cafeteria line on the courthouse's main floor, debating between the sad chicken salad and the sadder pasta, when a familiar voice caught her ear. "You're back already," it said, thick with sarcasm. Autumn turned. Behind her stood Greg Avery, a senior prosecutor in the DA's office. Tall, white, and smug in that effortless way some men in power never learn to hide. His tie was crooked like his attitude. He held a coffee cup that read, "Justice never sleeps," though his eyes told a different story. Autumn gave a polite nod. "Good afternoon." He leaned in, lowering his voice with mock concern. "Heard you had a rough weekend. Everything okay?" She knew the tone, the condescension disguised as curiosity. She'd heard it in law school, heard it in judge confirmation hearings. Now here it was again, like an old song she hated. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied. "Glad to hear it," Greg said, taking a step closer, invading her personal space just enough. You know, some of the guys were wondering, might be a good time to take a little break. Clear your head. There it was, the suggestion, disguised as kindness, laced with control. Autumn smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. Would you be suggesting that if I were a white man in a suit who got pulled over for a broken taillight? Greg blinked. Come on, Autumn. Don't make this about race. This is about optics. Ah, she said, stepping around him to grab her tray. So it's about what I look like, not what they did. He laughed, forced and flat. Let's not get dramatic. No drama, she said, her voice calm as a still lake. Just facts. She walked off, tray in hand, not looking back. Greg stood there for a moment longer, sipping coffee he didn't need, trying to figure out why he suddenly felt smaller. Back upstairs in her chambers, Autumn sat behind her desk, hands folded over the latest batch of motion files. But her focus was splintered, because as much as she hated to admit it, Greg wasn't wrong about one thing. The whispers had started. Two junior clerks in the hallway had quieted when she passed. A defense attorney she'd worked with for years now couldn't meet her eye. Even the chief judge, normally warm and chatty, had sent her a stiff email instead of stopping by. They all knew what happened. They had seen the video. And instead of outrage, most of them had chosen distance. The irony? She'd always known the robe was a disguise. People saw it and assumed authority, fairness, wisdom. But take it off, wear a hoodie, sit on a park bench. And suddenly they forgot. Forgot her resume. Forgot her position. Forgot her name. That, she thought, was the real verdict. The second strike came later that week, quietly. Her calendar was suddenly reassigned for a high-profile use-of-force case involving a local officer and a Latino teen. No explanation, no warning, just gone. The clerk's voice on the phone was shaky. I was just told Judge Hollins would be taking that one, the young woman said. They didn't say why. I thought you knew. Autumn hung up without answering. She knew exactly why. And it had nothing to do with scheduling. It had everything to do with comfort. They weren't ready for a black woman in a hoodie making them look in the mirror. On Thursday, Autumn walked into the break room on the third floor like she always did. 10:30 a.m. Refill of black coffee, 1 sugar, no cream. Routine. Except this time the room quieted. She caught the last words of a sentence before it was swallowed by silence. Should have just shown the ID and kept it moving. 3 people stood by the microwave. She knew them all. 2 assistant DAs and 1 clerk from the public defender's office. They avoided her eyes like the floor had suddenly become fascinating. Autumn poured her coffee, slowly. She didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Her silence filled the space better than confrontation ever could. One of the women, Emily, a junior prosecutor, cleared her throat and tried to smile. Hey, Judge Mason. Crazy weather today, huh? Autumn turned, one brow raised slightly. Emily wilted. Autumn walked out without responding. Down in courtroom 4B, the docket was heavy. Motions to suppress. Probation hearings. 1 bench trial for shoplifting. All minor cases, but they stacked up fast. Autumn handled them with her usual calm precision. She was known for it. Efficient, fair, measured. But all day she could feel it. The eyes. Not from the defendants. Not from the lawyers. From the bailiffs. From the court officers. From the clerks. A new kind of scrutiny. Not overt. Just sharp enough to cut. Every action she took seemed to land louder. Every ruling came with an extra pause before people responded. Even when she called for a 10-minute recess, a court officer double-checked her authority. Are we clear to step down now, Your Honor? He asked, his tone thinly veiled. She stared at him over the rim of her glasses. Unless the laws changed in the last hour, she replied flatly. Yes. The weight wasn't the work. She could handle the work. The weight was the quiet. The kind of quiet that came after someone branded you a liability. She wasn't on trial. Not officially, but the courtroom had turned into one, and every hallway had become a jury box. That night, she went home and sat in the dark for a while before turning the lights on. The hoodie was still hanging from the hook behind the door, still damp from its last wash, still soft from years of wear. She stared at it for a long time. Then finally she walked over, lifted it from the hook, and held it in her hands. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was memory, armor, identity. She had worn it the day she graduated from law school, underneath her blazer. She had worn it when she signed her first apartment lease. She had worn it when she buried her mother. It was the one thing that had always reminded her of who she really was, beneath the robe, beneath the title, beneath the silence. That hoodie didn't make her less professional. It made her real. The next morning, she walked into the courthouse wearing it. No robe, no blazer, just black slacks, low heels, and the hoodie. People stared. Someone in the elevator coughed awkwardly. A janitor nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Judge Mason." She nodded back. Eyes followed her down the hallway like they were tracking something unstable, as if she were radioactive now. In courtroom 4B, she held her motion session without saying a word about the outfit. She ruled, she explained, she adjourned, flawless. And then she stood and addressed the courtroom. "There's a saying in this country," she began, her voice steady, "that justice is blind." Silence. Everyone listened now. I wonder if that's why some people think the minute a black woman sits still in a park with a hoodie on, she must be a threat. Her words hung in the air. "I've presided over hundreds of cases in this courtroom, but I've never had to fight so hard just to be seen outside it." She let that breathe. "And then, this," she said, pulling the edges of the hoodie gently, "doesn't change the law, doesn't change my mind, doesn't change who I am." She paused. "It just changes who's uncomfortable." And with that, she stepped down from the bench. They didn't clap. They didn't speak. But one young black intern in the back row, barely 20, fresh from her first pre-law summer class, smiled. Because for the first time in her short legal life, she saw herself at the front of the room. The hallway after court was different this time. No nods from the other judges. No casual, "good job" from bailiffs. Just silence and space. People stepped a little farther aside as she walked by, like she was carrying something dangerous instead of a case file and a coffee cup. No one said anything rude. No one said anything at all. And somehow that was worse. Autumn knew what was happening. Power doesn't have to be taken to feel threatened. Sometimes it just has to walk in wearing a hoodie. Later that afternoon, her assistant, Janine, loyal, sharp, stepped into her office, visibly tense. "Judge Mason," she said softly, "I thought you should see this." Autumn took the sheet of paper from her hand. It was a printed-out screenshot, a Facebook post. On it was a still image, her sitting on the park bench the moment before the arrest. Hoodie on, book in lap, completely still. Someone had screenshotted the paused body cam footage from the circulating video and added a caption above it in bold red letters. "When judges start dressing like thugs, is it any wonder our courts are falling apart?" Underneath, a string of comments. "This can't be real. Is this seriously a judge?" Maybe she forgot which side of the bench she belongs on. Not surprised. They get a little power and think they're above the law. This is why the streets look the way they do. Autumn stared at it for a moment, then placed the paper down on her desk, face up. "Thank you, Janine. You want me to report it?" "No," Autumn said, her voice steady. "Let them talk." Janine hesitated. "You sure?" Autumn nodded. The louder they get, the more it shows who they really are. The post spread fast. By the next day, Legal Forums had picked it up. A conservative podcast dedicated an entire segment to what's wrong with modern judges. Some local columnists took more careful aim, questioning her neutrality and suggesting her arrest posed ethical complications. No one mentioned that the charges were baseless. No one mentioned that she had never been read her rights. No one mentioned that she had, at every turn, acted with more control than most people in uniform. They only saw the hoodie. That night, her sister called. "Autumn, I'm trying to stay calm," Maya said through gritted teeth. "But you have to say something. These people are smearing you." "I am saying something," Autumn replied, sipping tea in the dark. "Just not the way they want me to." "I saw the video again," Maya continued. "You didn't flinch. Even when they cuffed you, you looked them dead in the eye." "I don't know how you did that." Autumn smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't afraid of the cuffs." "What were you afraid of?" Autumn didn't answer right away. She thought of the girl with the phone in the park, the courtroom intern who smiled, the quiet kid who sat at the back of the gallery every week, who never spoke, but never missed a hearing. "I'm afraid of what happens," she finally said, "if they stop seeing people like me in these seats." On Friday, a letter arrived. Anonymous, typed, no return address. Inside was a single page. "You don't belong on that bench. You embarrass the court. Take the hint and walk away. Judges don't wear hoodies." It was unsigned, but it had been mailed directly to her office, which meant it wasn't from a stranger, it was from someone inside. She didn't flinch, she didn't report it. She did something worse. She kept showing up. The next week she wore the hoodie again. Black this time. No logos, no message, no resistance. Just choice. The whispers turned to murmurs, the murmurs to tension, and the tension to pressure. Meetings were requested. The chief judge asked to have a word. Human Resources sent courtesy emails regarding professional appearance, but she stayed quiet, did her job, ruled fairly, and walked home each night with the hood up, not in fear but in defiance. Because that's how the first strike works. It doesn't knock you down, it tests your balance. And when they push, you plant your feet deeper. The email came at 6:42 a.m., subject line, Judicial Oversight Panel, Public Review Meeting Notice. Autumn Mason read it twice, then a third time. It was official. They were holding a public hearing to review the conduct and optics surrounding recent law enforcement interaction involving Judge Autumn Mason. She knew the language well. She'd written enough rulings to recognize the precision of cowardice. This wasn't about the law. This was about optics, about image, about making sure the people in power didn't have to explain why a black woman in a hoodie had become the symbol of their system's blind spots. By noon, it was everywhere. Local news stations ran the headline in block letters, "Judge faces ethics review after park incident sparks controversy." The thumbnail was a blurry screenshot from the arrest video, her face half-shadowed by the hoodie, hands behind her back, her posture dignified in the most undignified of moments. The anchors didn't say she was innocent. They said she was involved. They didn't say she was unlawfully detained. They said she had refused to cooperate. They didn't say the officers had profiled her. They said, "We have reached out to the police department for further clarification." The narrative was being rewritten in real time. And Autumn? She watched in silence, sipping cold tea, the volume muted. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday, public, which meant cameras, which meant headlines, which meant the moment wasn't just about truth, it was about control, about who would define her story first. The courthouse was packed that morning. They held the hearing in Conference Room B, far too small for the number of people who came. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder with court staff. Lawyers squeezed into back corners, whispering into phones. A few elected officials hovered near the side entrance like ghosts unsure where to stand. And in the center, Autumn. She sat alone at the long table. No legal counsel. No papers in front of her. Just a folded hoodie resting across her lap. Black, plain, familiar. The panel sat across from her. 3 white judges and 1 Latino representative from the Public Accountability Office. They looked tense, uncomfortable, like people who'd rather be anywhere else, but had chosen to be here out of obligation. The chief judge cleared his throat. Judge Mason, this is not a disciplinary hearing, merely a review. But due to the public nature of recent events, we've been asked to evaluate whether your actions, public and private, have compromised the integrity of the judiciary. Autumn said nothing. The microphones picked up the silence like it was a weapon. Another panelist leaned forward. Would you like to respond to the concerns that your attire and subsequent behavior may have created confusion regarding your role as a judicial officer? Autumn raised an eyebrow. My attire? Yes, the judge continued. Specifically the hoodie. Autumn reached down and gently unfolded it on the table. She didn't wear it. Not yet. She wanted them to see it, to stare at it, to try and make it dangerous with their eyes. I wore this, she said calmly, on my day off, while reading Toni Morrison, on a park bench. No one spoke. Do you believe fabric invalidates my authority? That's not what we're saying, the panelist said quickly. We're saying that the incident has created perception issues in the public eye. And whose perception is that? Autumn asked, still calm. Because I was arrested without cause, detained, humiliated, and now I'm the one being questioned? We're trying to assess if the situation reflects poorly on the court. It is the court, she cut in. The real court. The one outside these walls, where perception is justice, and where wearing this, she held up the hoodie, was all it took to make me look guilty. The room was quiet again. Cameras clicked. A reporter whispered into a mic behind her, and Autumn sat still, calm, composed, exactly as she had on that park bench. But humiliation doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it's in the polite tones, the passive phrasing, the way they make you defend your own existence like it's a legal question with precedent. And that day they made her relive it, frame by frame. They showed the video projected on a screen behind her, from the body cam, from the civilian phone, from every angle possible. Each clip frozen on her face, paused on the hoodie, focused on how calm she looked, as if that made her more suspicious. The irony didn't escape her. The world finally saw her, and still didn't see her. The video ended with a flat click. The room sat in its own uncomfortable stillness. The last image still frozen on the projection screen behind Autumn. Her face turned slightly away from the camera, eyes forward, cuffs on, hoodie still over her head. No resistance, no outburst, just silence. Unflinching, unreadable silence. Someone in the back sniffled. One of the younger clerks, probably new enough to still feel something when they saw injustice framed as review. Across the table, the chair of the judicial panel cleared his throat again. The second time he'd done that. The second time he didn't know what to say. He looked down at his notes even though there was nothing left to read. Judge Mason, he began, you've heard the community's concerns. You've seen how this footage affects public trust. Autumn leaned forward slightly. I'm not sure whose public you're referring to. I beg your pardon. Because the only community I heard from this week were the mothers who sent me emails, the law students who wrote thank you letters, the black men who told me they saw their own cuffs in mine. A silence heavier than shame filled the room. And just to be clear, she continued, I didn't come here to restore their trust in me. I came here to remind you why I ever had it in the first place. The Latina panelist, quiet until now, finally spoke. Judge Mason, have you experienced anything like this before? Prior profiling? Autumn met her eyes. It was the first time anyone had asked that. Every time I drive through a rich neighborhood, she said. Every time I shop in a store where the security follows me instead of greeting me. Every time I walk into a courtroom and someone mistakes me for a defendant before I sit on the bench. Her voice didn't crack. It sharpened. Being judged while Black in America isn't an event. It's a daily condition. The chair tried to shift the focus. Well, this hearing isn't to litigate race relations. Then what is it for? Autumn asked, straightening in her chair. Perception. There it was again. That word. That unmeasurable, unaccountable, slippery slope of perception. I see, Autumn said softly. So to be clear, the perception of an officer assuming I'm a threat isn't the problem. Silence. But the perception of a judge wearing a hoodie? That's the threat. Nobody answered. She didn't expect them to. Someone coughed in the back. Another camera clicked. The room was growing heavier with the realization that they had invited the public to witness a spectacle, and instead, they were watching a reckoning, a dismantling of assumptions with every calm word she spoke. They had expected defensiveness. What they got was control. They expected apology. What they got was truth. Autumn reached for the hoodie folded on her lap and lifted it gently, like it was something sacred. This, she said, holding it up, has never been a symbol of disrespect. It is not a gang sign. It is not a weapon. It's cotton, and memory, and power. She paused. When I wear it, I remember walking to school while my mother worked a double shift. I remember not having a coat, so this hoodie was what kept me warm. I remember nights at the library hunched over bar books, when this was the only thing I owned that felt like mine. She laid it flat on the table again. You think it makes me look less like a judge? I think it's the reason I became one. Someone in the back clapped. Just once. A single instinctive sound. Then silence again. Not out of shame now, but reverence. The chair looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. So he tapped his gavel lightly, almost apologetically. Thank you, Judge Mason. The panel will deliberate and release our findings within the next 10 business days. Autumn stood, not rushed, not stiff, just solid. She picked up the hoodie, draped it over her forearm, and walked out. Cameras followed her. Reporters tried to shout questions. She said nothing. Because silence, when it belongs to you, is louder than their noise. Outside the courthouse, the street was lined with people. Some held signs, "We stand with Autumn." Judges wear hoodies too. The law can't be blind to color. She paused at the top of the stairs, looked down, and among the crowd, just to the left, was a little girl, maybe 10, standing beside her father. Black hoodie, braids, big eyes. Autumn met her gaze, nodded once, and smiled. The girl smiled back, raising her fist gently, hoodie sleeve slipping down her arm. Autumn Mason didn't cry. She didn't cry when they cuffed her. She didn't cry when they questioned her dignity in front of strangers. And she didn't cry when she stood alone at the top of those courthouse stairs, 100 camera flashes burning against her skin like summer heat. But later that night, when the world quieted down and the house was still, something inside her cracked. Not from weakness, but from the weight of carrying herself through a storm no one had ever intended her to survive with grace. She sat on her couch, hoodie still in her lap, TV muted. The news played on a loop, clips from the hearing, photos of the crowd, panels of commentators dissecting the moment like it was a football game and not her life. One host said she had played the race card elegantly. Another suggested the police had every reason to be cautious. She was wearing a hoodie after all. A third, an older white man with too much makeup and not enough soul, claimed maybe she should just stick to wearing the robe and stop pushing cultural buttons. Autumn watched them like exhibits in a gallery of ignorance. Not surprised, just tired. Then her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text, it was a video. Sent by Marissa, her best friend, the one who'd picked her up after the arrest. The video wasn't from the courthouse. It was from the park. The girl, the one with the phone, the same one who had filmed that first moment, the arrest, the humiliation. She'd posted it, but it wasn't just the raw footage. It was her story. Autumn pressed play. The girl, maybe 16 no more, spoke into the camera, eyes wide but sure. They said she was dangerous because she wore a hoodie, but I was there. I saw everything. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just sat there, calm, and that scared them more than anything. I didn't know her name that day, but now I do. Her name is Autumn Mason, and she's not just a judge. She's the reason I want to become one. The screen faded to black, and a single line appeared. Hashtag I see you, Judge Mason. Autumn blinked hard. It wasn't tears, not quite, just a shift, a loosening, because somewhere out there, a girl had seen her, not just the humiliation, but the dignity inside it, and decided to rise. By morning, the video had gone viral, over 2 million views in 12 hours. Celebrities retweeted it, law professors quoted it, civil rights organizations reposted it with captions like, "A hoodie shouldn't cost you your humanity or your job. This is what strength looks like." True justice isn't just about robes. It's about the people who wear them. Autumn's inbox flooded. Some messages came from young women in hoodies. Some from old men who once thought like the officers who cuffed her. Some from judges across the country who admitted they'd never had the courage to speak up like she did. But one message stood out. It was handwritten, delivered by courier. No signature, just initials. The card read, "You didn't just sit on that bench. You reminded us why it's sacred." Underneath, typed on official letterhead, "The Judicial Oversight Panel has voted unanimously to close all inquiries. No further action required." She folded the letter, set it beside her tea, and finally pulled the hoodie over her head. Not out of defense, not out of habit, but out of ownership. At the courthouse that morning, she walked through the main entrance instead of the back. Security guards nodded. A few lawyers clapped quietly. Even Greg Avery, the smug prosecutor, offered a stiff smile, an apology embedded in silence. She didn't stop, didn't gloat, just walked. Straight to courtroom 4B, her courtroom. Inside, it was standing room only. Not for spectacle, but for presence. Law students, reporters, community members, young black girls in hoodies, white kids with notebooks. Bailiffs who once couldn't meet her eyes now stood at attention. And when Autumn Mason stepped up to the bench, they rose. Not because the law said so, because respect did. She adjusted the mic, her voice low, controlled. "As we begin today's session, let me say one thing." She paused, meeting every eye in the room. "I am still here." Silence, then applause. Not explosive, not chaotic, but earnest, enduring. The world should have moved on. The hearing was over. The panel had cleared her. The video had gone viral. Support poured in from every corner of the country, from courtroom clerks in Detroit to Harvard law professors quoting her closing words. You'd think that would be the end of it. But Autumn Mason knew better. In America, vindication isn't a finish line. It's a target on your back. It started small. A few subtle changes in the docket. She was quietly removed from 2 upcoming cases involving law enforcement misconduct, cases she had been assigned to for months. No explanation, just reallocated to a senior judge. That judge, a white man with a history of siding with police testimony over body cam footage. Then came the calendar reshuffles, internal memos about optics fatigue, a new media policy limiting what sitting judges could say, even off the bench. Even privately, she was being boxed in, slowly, systematically, not by racists, by cowards. The whispers followed. She's making this political. She's too visible. Her presence is polarizing. They didn't say black, they didn't say hoodie, but they didn't need to. Then came the story. An anonymous tip landed on the desk of a local blog known for courthouse gossip. It painted Autumn as erratic, accused her of abusing judicial discretion, and even implied she had a personal vendetta against law enforcement due to childhood trauma. No sources, no facts, just venom, disguised as journalism. It spread fast. By that evening, a national tabloid picked it up. Headline: The Hidden Rage of Judge Mason, Hoodie, History and Harassment. They printed her college essays out of context, shared a quote she gave to her law school's Black Student Union 10 years ago. The law doesn't protect people like me. It survives because people like me bend themselves to fit inside it. The piece twisted it, claimed it as proof she didn't believe in the system she served. They posted side-by-side images of her in a robe and her in the hoodie, called it a study in duality, judge or activist, and worst of all, they used her mother's obituary, claimed Autumn's rise was fueled by loss and resentment. That's when the line was crossed. Autumn sat on her porch that night, holding the newspaper in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other. The page trembled, not from her hand, but from the storm rolling in across the horizon. Thick clouds bloomed like bruises in the sky. She didn't speak, didn't call Marissa, didn't cry. She just stared at her mother's name in print, dragged into a war she never asked for. The next morning, the courthouse was buzzing, not just from the article, but from what came after. Graffiti, spray painted across the glass doors of the judicial building, in bold red letters. Judge by color, not by law. They had to cancel court for 2 hours. News vans were already circling. One reporter shouted, "Judge Mason, do you condone anti-police rhetoric?" as she walked past. She didn't respond. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was precision. In chambers, her assistant Janine was pacing. "I swear I recognize that graffiti tag," she muttered. "Same font as that incident at the city clerk's office. I can look into Dash." "Not yet," Autumn said quietly. Janine stopped. "Not yet. I need to know who's behind this first, and not just the kid with the can." Janine blinked. "You think this goes higher?" Autumn didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, an envelope was slid under her chamber door. No return address, no markings. Inside, a flash drive, one file, video footage, security camera. Low angle. Date stamped 2:13 a.m. The front of the courthouse. A shadowy figure, hoodie up, alone. At first glance, it looked like her. The same frame, same building, same hoodie. But Autumn had been home, asleep, alone. Someone was trying to frame her. She leaned back in her chair. The trap wasn't just set, it was personal now. The footage was too clean. That was the first red flag. The resolution was sharper than any city camera should have offered at 2 a.m. The lighting hit the face just enough to blur it, but not enough to disprove anything. Whoever staged the video knew what they were doing. It wasn't surveillance, it was cinematography. Autumn replayed it frame by frame, her jaw locked tight. The hoodie identical to hers. Same color, same design. Even the posture matched. Someone had studied her, learned the way she stood, the way she walked, how she adjusted the hood before pulling it over her curls. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. By the end of the night, she had pulled the security logs from the courthouse building manager. Janine made a few calls and confirmed that the original security system had a 12-day video loop, meaning whoever had this file had access to an off-grid recording device. Private, planted, intentional. Autumn closed her laptop, sat back in the leather chair, and let the facts build their own indictment. They hadn't just humiliated her, now they were hunting her. And it was time to hunt back. She called Marissa. "Tell me everything you know about how dirty cops sanitize digital trails." Marissa didn't ask questions, just opened her laptop. By the next morning, they had a short list of names: tech vendors, low-level courthouse security contractors, city council aides who had voting power over judicial assignments and access to video feeds. 3 names overlapped on every list, but one stood out: Captain Ray Aldridge. Aldridge wasn't just security, he was the former head of internal affairs for the Lakemont Police Department, quietly retired, now worked in a consultant role overseeing risk mitigation for the courthouse district. It was his badge number on the shift rotation log the night the footage was recorded. It was his private email linked to a third-party camera system not found in the city budget. And most damning, he'd been one of the officers disciplined 5 years ago after Judge Mason suppressed evidence in a case involving a wrongful stop of a Latino teenager. That ruling had made headlines and cost Aldridge a promotion. Now he had motive, access, and a plan. Autumn didn't go public. Not yet. She wasn't about vengeance. She was about proof, and power moved different when it waited for its moment. So she went to court the next day like nothing had changed. She wore her robe, wore the hoodie under it, and let the system underestimate her one last time. But the pressure didn't stop. The mayor's office issued a bland press release stating serious concern over ongoing controversies surrounding certain judicial figures. It didn't name her, but the local radio made sure listeners knew who it was aimed at. Anonymous texts hit her personal phone. You think your little speech saved you? The hood comes off or the bench does. Watch the tape again. We got more. Her email was flooded with hate. Her address leaked. Reporters now camped outside her home. And in the courtroom, she noticed it. The smirks, the lowered eyes, the sudden lack of eye contact from people who once swore they respected her. They weren't afraid of what she'd done. They were afraid of what she represented. And those who couldn't silence her truth were now trying to rewrite it. Then the final straw. A motion was filed late Friday afternoon. Motion for emergency recusal, filed by an attorney representing Lakemont's police union, citing evidence that Judge Mason may have personally engaged in political defacement of a state facility, a direct reference to the graffiti incident. Attached was a still image from the doctored video, a blurry silhouette in a hoodie, spray can in hand. Autumn felt her body go cold. They were trying to push her off the bench, not through scandal, through sabotage. But what they didn't know, she wasn't alone. Because while the system tried to erase her, her story had already gone too far, too wide, too deep, and in places they never expected, people were paying attention. That same night, as Autumn sat at her desk trying to draft a response, her phone buzzed. A new video, sent anonymously, footage from across the street the night of the graffiti, a side angle, different camera, different story. The figure in the hoodie, shorter, different gait, not her. And on the bottom corner, a logo, Dorn Tower Private Security Feed, authorized personnel only. A security firm with ties to city contracts, and more importantly, to Aldridge. Autumn watched the video 3 times, then smiled, for the first time in weeks, because now she had them. Autumn didn't rush. She never did. That was the difference between her and the people trying to destroy her. They moved in panic. She moved with purpose. She spent the weekend building her case like a fortress. Lined every piece of evidence up with care. The doctored footage, the real security video, the metadata timestamps, even the motion for recusal filed with falsified claims. She didn't just want to defend herself. She wanted exposure, not just for her sake, but for everyone who wore a hoodie and got labeled a threat. For every Black woman who learned to armor her dignity in silence. For every girl watching, wondering if justice had a voice that sounded like hers. Monday morning arrived cloudy and humid, like the city was holding its breath. Courtroom 3C had been reserved for the emergency recusal hearing. Press wasn't allowed, but word had already leaked. The gallery was full of attorneys, off-duty judges, and concerned citizens, which was code for people who had either tried to get rid of her or were waiting to see if they'd be next. Captain Ray Aldridge sat in the second row, flanked by two men in navy suits, stern, hushed, watching. Autumn walked in alone, but she wasn't outnumbered, not anymore. The judge presiding over the hearing, Justice Langford, was sharp, no nonsense, and widely respected. He wore his impartiality like armor, but Autumn knew he had once clerked under a man who called MLK an agitator in a preacher's robe. Still, she gave him the benefit of the doubt, until she didn't need to. The motion was read aloud. It sounded official, procedural, clinical. But Autumn knew what it really was, a hit job dressed in legalese. When it was her turn, she didn't just object. She stood and spoke. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and firm, "I have prepared a response to the motion before the court. But before I do, I must address something far more dangerous than a false allegation." Langford adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." Autumn reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a printed photo, still image from the real surveillance footage. "Exhibit A," she said, placing it on the clerk's desk. "The actual figure responsible for the graffiti incident. Not me. Not even close." The courtroom murmured. Langford raised an eyebrow. "And your source?" "A private feed from Dorn Tower Security, across the street from the courthouse. Unedited, time-stamped, obtained legally." She placed a flash drive beside the photo. "Exhibit B, the full footage, including the audio and system log that proves I was at home, on a virtual Zoom call with the University of Denver's pre-law mentorship program. While this incident occurred," Langford tilted forward, "you're submitting real-time digital alibi evidence?" Autumn nodded. "Correct, cross-verified, and notarized." More murmurs. Even the bailiff looked impressed. Autumn turned slowly, facing the gallery. Then calmly she said, "And now Exhibit C." She held up a copy of the fake video, zoomed in, altered, misleading. "This footage was sent anonymously to my chambers last week. It was followed by threats, vandalism, and a motion to strip me of my judicial standing." She paced once, then locked eyes with Aldridge. "But here's what they didn't account for. Every frame leaves fingerprints, and the digital fingerprint of this video traces directly back to an off-the-books surveillance node, installed and monitored by Captain Raymond Aldridge." Gasps, audible now. Langford leaned back, his face unreadable. Autumn didn't flinch. "I have emails, I have internal logs. I have contracts linking Dorn Tower's rogue feeds to a personal LLC owned by Aldridge's cousin, and I have 3 whistleblower statements from courthouse employees who were pressured into maintaining these feeds without proper disclosure." She let the silence hang, then delivered the closing line like a gavel strike. "Your Honor, I am not here to simply defend my right to serve. I am here to expose the coordinated effort to silence a judge who made the system uncomfortable because she refused to play silent while wearing a hoodie." Langford blinked. He looked down, then back up. "Motion for recusal is denied. Request for criminal investigation into evidence tampering and judicial harassment will be submitted to the State Inspector General immediately." Autumn nodded once. No smile, just acknowledgement. She turned and walked past Aldridge, his face pale and frozen. She leaned just close enough to whisper, "You should have picked someone who didn't know the law better than you." Then she was gone. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different. People didn't just move aside anymore. They moved with her. A young court intern jogged up behind her. "Judge Mason?" Autumn turned. The girl swallowed. Nervous. "I just wanted to say thank you for fighting back, for not stepping down." Autumn studied her for a moment. "What's your name?" "Janelle." "Janelle," she said softly. "You ever think about wearing a hoodie into law school?" Janelle blinked. "I mean, I've never really thought I could." Autumn smiled. "Then let me be the first to tell you, you can. And if anyone says otherwise, she paused. They're not the law. You are. The sun hadn't yet cracked the horizon when the black SUV rolled up outside Autumn Mason's childhood home in Montclair. It didn't carry a badge, didn't flash lights, didn't make a sound. But everyone on that street knew when it parked. Somebody important had just arrived. Inside, the man in the back seat adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit, slipped on a pair of thin-frame glasses, and checked the file in his lap. No name on the cover, just a single word. Mason. The man's name was Arthur Mason, retired brigadier general, former federal judge, decorated Vietnam veteran, Autumn's father. He hadn't appeared publicly in years, chose silence over punditry, refused interviews, declined honorary boards, never even let the VA name a wing after him. But when his daughter called him the night after the Aldridge fallout, he didn't hesitate. He got in the car and drove 10 hours overnight. No words exchanged, just presence. That's how shadows move, not loudly, but with purpose. When Autumn opened the door that morning, she didn't cry, didn't hug him like a little girl, just stood still, letting the weight of his silence wash over the chaos that had consumed her life for weeks. "Hey, Daddy." He nodded once. "You eat yet?" She almost laughed. "No." "Then let's fix that." They sat in the old kitchen, sunlight slowly warming the chipped tile. She made eggs the way he liked, over medium, hot sauce on the side. He didn't speak until the coffee was poured and the first bite was taken. Then gently, "You held your ground." Autumn looked down. "They wanted me gone. Still do." Arthur sipped. "That's how power works. When it can't beat you clean, it comes for your character." She nodded. He continued, voice calm and deep like the gravel under a tank's tread. "But they made a mistake." She looked up. "They thought you were alone." Later that day, they drove to Denver in silence. Arthur didn't touch the radio, didn't check his phone. He just stared out the window like a general returning to a battlefield, not with anger, but calculation. Autumn had arranged for a private briefing with federal oversight attorneys. The investigation into Aldridge was expanding. The FBI had opened a separate file. Internal affairs had been stripped of authority over the review. It was no longer about Autumn, it was about institutional rot. But when she walked into the room, every face turned, not to her, but to him. Because everyone in that room knew who Arthur Mason was. And nobody asked why he was there. He didn't speak during the first hour, just took notes, listened, measured each person's tone like a man sizing up enemy positions. But when the lead agent suggested a quiet resolution, a plea deal for Aldridge to avoid too much noise during an election cycle, Arthur finally spoke. One word. "No." The agent blinked. "Excuse me?" Arthur leaned forward. "No deals, no sealed settlements, no optics management. The moment you put that man in cuffs, you tell the world what happens when you target a federal judge with lies." His voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be, because the air changed when Arthur Mason spoke. It always had. That evening, Autumn sat on her porch while her father stood in the yard, trimming the hedges like he used to when her mother was alive. It was almost funny how a man like him, who had stood before presidents and tribunals, found peace in pruning roses. He came up the steps, wiped his hands with an old cloth, and sat beside her. "You were always your mother's fire," he said. Autumn smiled. "And your shadow?" "No, my light." She paused. "You didn't have to come." "I did." "Why now?" Arthur looked out toward the fading sky. "Because when they come for one of us, they watch to see who else stands. Most days they expect no one." He turned to her, eyes firm. "But I'm still standing." The next day, he walked with her into court. No announcements, no cameras, just a silent message. The woman in the hoodie came from something unshakable, and when she stepped onto the bench, robe pressed, eyes calm, and voice clear. Her father sat in the gallery, hands folded, watching, waiting. And the entire courtroom knew the shadow had woken. It didn't take long for the courthouse to notice the man in the gallery. He didn't speak, didn't shift in his seat, didn't pull out a phone, or whisper to the people beside him like so many spectators did. But when Arthur Mason walked into courtroom 4B and sat in the third row, straight-backed, calm-eyed, hands resting on a cane no one believed he needed, the atmosphere changed. One bailiff, Tyrone, whispered to another, "Ain't that the Judge Mason? The old one? The original?" For the first time since the scandal broke, nobody interrupted Autumn mid-ruling. No objections wrapped in attitude. No second guesses from whispering prosecutors. No eye rolls from defense attorneys trying to gauge her authority. Just silence and respect. Because power recognizes lineage, especially when it walks in the door behind you and carries itself like it built the foundation. When the session ended, Autumn stepped down from the bench, robe flowing, and joined her father by the exit. "You sat through all 4 hours?" she asked gently. Arthur nodded. "Didn't need to stand, just needed them to know I was watching." "Think it worked?" He gave a small, dry smile. "They stopped breathing like wolves. That's a start." Outside, a young officer opened the door for them, eyes wide, hands nervously steady. "Judge Mason," he said with a slight nod. "Sir?" Arthur nodded back. "Appreciate you, son." The officer didn't move for a moment. "My dad told me about you," he said. "Said you once ruled against your own commanding officer in a court-martial and didn't blink once." Arthur looked him over. "That true?" "That's what he said. Said you changed the game back then." Arthur gave a slow nod. "Well, the game hasn't changed back yet. Make sure it doesn't." By the time they reached the car, 3 local journalists had already started circling near the parking lot. Not full-on paparazzi, just that nervous, hungry kind of press, the ones who think if they frame the right picture, they'll own the story. Autumn noticed them. Arthur didn't. He walked with his daughter like they were just heading home from church, until one of the reporters called out too loud, "General Mason, are you here because your daughter needs help saving her career?" Arthur stopped mid-step, turned. Autumn felt the chill roll in. The reporter raised his mic a little higher, emboldened. "Do you think it damages the integrity of the judiciary for a federal judge's father to intervene in a public controversy?" Arthur took 2 slow steps toward him. No security, no anger, just presence. "Son," he said, voice low, "if I'd shown up to save my daughter, you wouldn't be holding that mic right now." The reporter blinked. I'm sorry." Arthur leaned in slightly. "I didn't come here because she was in trouble. I came because you all were. You just didn't know it yet." He turned back to Autumn. "Shall we?" They got in the car and drove away, leaving the cameras confused in the silence charge. That night, a photo surfaced online. No caption, just a grainy image. Autumn Mason and her father walking side by side down the courthouse steps, her robe draped over one arm, his cane steady beside her. Someone tweeted it with one word, "Legacy." It was reposted 84,000 times in 12 hours. But it wasn't just Twitter. That same night, Autumn received an email from an appellate judge in Georgia, then another from a federal clerk in Chicago, then one from a young law student in South Carolina. Each said some version of the same thing: "We saw him, and we see you." Tuesday brought a different kind of attention, not just respect, but reckoning. A memo leaked from the State Commission on Judicial Ethics. Apparently, the same board that had tried to quietly discourage Autumn from speaking at public events was now under internal review for suppressing complaints from other Black judges across the state. Somehow, her case had cracked open a wall others had been pounding on for years. When she got home that evening, Arthur was in the backyard, fixing the gate again, even though it didn't really need fixing. Autumn leaned on the post. "You still pretending this gate needs help?" she teased. Arthur didn't look back. "Everything needs a checkup after a storm." She stepped beside him. "I'm not out of it yet," she said softly. He nodded, adjusting the hinge. "Good." She tilted her head. "Good?" He met her eyes. "Because if it's still raining, that means they haven't seen the thunder yet." Wednesday brought the storm, not the metaphorical kind, the literal one. Thunder cracked above Denver before sunrise. Rain fell hard enough to turn sidewalks into rivers. The sky hung low like judgment. Autumn stood at the window of her chambers, arms crossed, watching water streak down the glass. Her docket was clear that morning, a rare break in a week full of friction, but her mind wasn't resting. Janine had just handed her another envelope. No return address. Inside, a printed blog post. It was titled, "Why Autumn Mason is Dangerous for the Judiciary." Anonymous, cowardly, predictable. They weren't using legal arguments anymore. They were using fear. Phrases like racial favoritism, activist robe wearer, emotional instability dressed in black authority. And yet the words didn't pierce like they used to, because now she had her armor. And part of it was sitting across from her, slowly sipping bad courthouse coffee, legs crossed at the ankle like he had all the time in the world. Arthur Mason, her father, the shadow behind the silence. "You see this?" she said, holding the paper up without turning. Arthur didn't flinch. "Let me guess. Another fool with Wi-Fi and a chip on his shoulder?" She cracked a half smile. "That's the modern version of a pitchfork, huh?" Arthur stood, walked to her side, and looked out at the rain with her. "They're just mad they aimed at a girl and hit a fortress," he said. Autumn looked at him. "You always talk like that?" He smirked. "Only when someone's watching." She stepped back from the window and reached for her laptop. "They're trying to push a federal appeal on the Aldridge case. Emergency injunction. Last play to stall prosecution." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "On what basis?" "Fabricated security risk. They're claiming media attention has made the courthouse unsafe. Says I invited danger by speaking out." Arthur gave a low chuckle. "So now truth's a safety hazard?" "Apparently." She sat down and opened the file folder that had become her second skin. Then she paused. "Dad," she said slowly, "how did you do it?" He looked up. "Do what?" "All those years. All those rooms where you knew you were the smartest one and the blackest one. All those decisions where you had to be perfect, just to be believed." Arthur didn't answer at first, just walked over, lowered himself into the armchair across from her, and folded his hands over his knee. Then he said, "I never thought I had to be perfect." Autumn raised an eyebrow. "No, I just knew I had to be ready. Ready to be underestimated, ready to be misquoted, ready to be alone, but most of all, ready to hold my dignity tighter than they could grab it." She sat still. "Let that sink in." He continued, his voice low but weighted. "Being a black judge doesn't mean you speak for us all. It means when they try to silence one of us, you carry every voice they've ignored into the room." There was a knock at the door. Janine stepped in, holding her phone. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing it to Autumn. It was a video, a live stream, from the University of Colorado Law School, a student protest. Hundreds of students, black, white, brown, gathered in front of the building, all wearing hoodies, holding signs. "Our judges wear hoodies too. Silence is no longer an option. We stand with Judge Mason." Autumn stared at the screen, then zoomed in. At the center of the crowd stood a girl in a deep green hoodie, book in her hands, eyes steady on the camera. Same bench posture, same quiet fire. It was the same girl from the park, the one who filmed the arrest. Now leading her own movement. Arthur leaned in. "That one right there?" he said. Autumn nodded, he smiled. "That's how you know the battle's worth it." An hour later, Autumn was scheduled to speak at a closed-door judicial conference. The invite had come weeks ago, before the hearing, before the smear campaign. before Aldridge. She'd considered backing out. Now she knew exactly what needed to be said. As she stood behind the podium, her robe perfectly pressed, hoodie folded neatly over her arm, the room quieted, all eyes on her. She didn't start with an apology or a defense. She started with a name. My father, Judge Arthur Mason, is sitting in the back of this room today. You may not see him, but his presence, his sacrifices, his silence, they made this space possible for me. She paused, then held up the hoodie. And this was never about clothing. It was about assumption. It was about fear. And it was about what happens when someone walks into a place they were never expected to survive in and stays. The room held its breath. Let this be a reminder. I'm not leaving this bench. I'm not stepping out of this robe. And I'm not taking off this hoodie. She folded it slowly. And if that makes the system uncomfortable, a beat, then maybe it's time we ask why the system was ever comfortable to begin with. Arthur stood in the back, and for the first time in years, he clapped. Once, twice, then the whole room followed. The morning news hit different that Friday, not because of the headline, but because of the tone. Local anchor, polished suit, serious voice. Breaking. Captain Raymond Aldridge placed on indefinite administrative leave following formal federal investigation into evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and targeting a sitting judge with falsified surveillance. Multiple subpoenas have been issued. Autumn stood at her kitchen counter, phone in hand, toast untouched, coffee cold. The screen showed Aldridge leaving his home, flanked by two agents in dark suits. He wasn't cuffed yet, but his face told the story. He looked like a man realizing he no longer controlled the ending. The camera panned to protesters gathering outside the courthouse. Not for chaos, for clarity. Hoodies everywhere, signs, who watches the watchman? Judges deserve justice too. Power doesn't erase accountability. One banner stretched across the front steps read, You messed with the wrong one. Autumn didn't know who made it, but she smiled. Because they were right. By noon, more dominoes fell. The blog that had run the anonymous smear piece issued a public retraction, apologized, admitted the article had been submitted by an unverified insider source connected to a security agency currently under investigation. Translation: Aldridge. His cousin's LLC, the shell company behind the private surveillance system, was dissolved overnight. The courthouse contract was pulled. And the ethics committee? They reversed the prior internal memo that had quietly suggested media discretion for sitting judges. Instead, they issued a new statement. Speaking truth while wearing the robe should never be discouraged. It should be defended. It was the kind of line that sounded like courage. But Autumn knew the difference between real courage and cleanup. Still, the fall had begun. Aldridge wasn't the only name under review now. Two former court officers had quietly stepped down. One clerk in the district assignment office resigned before lunch, and Judge Harlan, a longtime critic of Autumn who had once called her more poet than professional behind closed doors, was suddenly unavailable for comment after leaked emails revealed he'd lobbied to have her bench reassigned for the good optics of the state. He was next. Autumn didn't raise her voice, didn't do interviews. She let the system eat its own. But it wasn't just the legal world watching now. That evening, 60 Minutes ran a preview clip of their upcoming segment, The Hoodie on the Bench, how one judge redefined power, perception, and the price of silence. The voiceover rolled over slow footage of Autumn in her robe, walking out of the courtroom, hood up. In a country where what you wear can still define what they see, Judge Autumn Mason reminds us what real justice looks like. It wasn't about fame. Autumn didn't care about the attention, but the impact, that was different. Because for every article retracting a lie, 10 more people now knew the truth. She walked into court the next Monday like any other day. Same robe, same calm, but everything felt different. Bailiffs straightened up. Young public defenders nodded respectfully. Even prosecutors who once bristled at her rulings now held their folders a little tighter, their language more careful, their eyes less dismissive. They weren't afraid of her. They were afraid of what she'd proven. You can't bury the system's flaws if the judge knows where you dug the hole. At lunch, she passed by the judge's lounge. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a conversation paused when her footsteps echoed down the hall. She didn't slow, didn't look in, but she caught the last thing one of them said. She might have just saved all of us. That afternoon, she called a short recess during a motions hearing, stepped outside her chambers into the corridor. There stood Janelle, the law student from the University of Colorado, the girl who once stood at the center of the protest with a book in her hand and her voice steady. She held up a letter. "I got accepted to the clerkship program," she said, barely containing her grin. Autumn raised an eyebrow. "Which judge?" Janelle smiled. "You." For the first time in weeks, Autumn laughed out loud. "Well then," she said, "welcome to the fire." Later that night, as the city settled into sleep, Arthur Mason watched the news with the volume low and the windows open. He saw his daughter's face appear, hoodie up, robe on, gavel in hand, and he whispered a single word into the quiet room. Good. Because the fall had come. Not hers. Theirs. Tuesday brought the hearings. Not Autumn's. Theirs. Raymond Aldridge was called to testify before the Federal Ethics Committee. What had started as an internal review had now become a formal inquiry into corruption, digital manipulation, and targeted harassment of a sitting judge. The courtroom was packed, but this time Autumn wasn't the one sitting under scrutiny. She sat in the back, hoodie on, not hiding, remembering. Aldridge looked smaller now, not in size but in presence. His voice, once loud and smug behind the veil of authority, now sounded brittle, like old glass. His lawyer answered most of the questions. When Aldridge did speak, it was through clenched teeth, each word a calculated risk. "We believe there was a legitimate concern regarding the judge's conduct. We received reports, anonymous but credible, regarding the graffiti. We did not intentionally falsify surveillance footage. There may have been technical errors." Autumn didn't blink, because the truth doesn't flinch. Then came the cross, and with it, the video, the real video, shown side by side with the edited one. The committee didn't need a law degree to see the difference. Frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp, the deception unfolded like a confession. The silence in the room became its own testimony. And when asked directly, "Captain Aldridge, did you authorize the installation of private surveillance equipment outside the courthouse using a third-party entity linked to your cousin?" He hesitated just a moment, but long enough. "Yes." The word fell like a gavel. It wasn't just Aldridge anymore. The fallout swept wider. Emails recovered through subpoena showed communication with Judge Harlan, the man who had tried to push Autumn into recusal. He'd referred to her in one exchange as the Hoodie problem. Another email, this one leaked to the press, had him writing, "If we can build a case around the graffiti, we might be able to isolate her from the public bench before it gets political." That line became a meme by nightfall. "Before it gets political." Written in bold font over a black and white photo of Autumn on the bench, her hoodie showing just beneath the collar of her robe. People were tired of pretending it hadn't been political. Judge Harlan retired the next day. The state issued no formal statement, but the silence was its own admission. And Autumn? She didn't say a word, because she didn't need to. The Denver Post ran a Sunday editorial titled, "The System Tried to Break Her. Now it's breaking for good reason." It was the first time in over a decade the paper had endorsed a judge, not for re-election, but for restoration. The final line of the piece read, Judge Mason didn't just hold the line, she redrew it. But the real moment came not in a headline nor a courtroom. It came in a small church on Denver's east side. That Sunday morning, Autumn walked in quietly, hoodie up beneath a soft wool coat. She hadn't been there since her mother's funeral. The pews were packed. Whispers followed her down the aisle, but not like before. No suspicion, no spectacle, just respect. She took a seat in the back. As the choir began to sing, the pastor stepped up to the pulpit, voice warm and gravelly. Family, he said, we've got someone here this morning who's been through the fire. Someone who stood when it would have been easier to sit. Someone who remembered who she was when they tried to make her forget. He looked down the aisle and found her face. She didn't ask for a stage. She didn't look for applause. But she gave this city a lesson in what power really looks like. He raised a hand toward her. Judge Autumn Mason, we see you. The entire church rose to its feet. Some clapped, some cried. All honored her not for surviving, but for refusing to be silent. Later that night, she sat on her back porch beside her father. The sky was clear, the wind light. He held a cup of tea. She held the Sunday paper. Her name was on the front again, but this time it didn't feel like weight. It felt like proof. Proof that dignity holds. Proof that the fall belongs to those who try to fake the truth. Proof that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a hoodie. By Wednesday, the courtroom felt lighter, not because the system was healed, but because the infection had been named. Gone were the sideways glances. Gone were the low whispers outside her chambers. The fear had shifted sides. And Autumn Mason? She remained the same. Hoodie under her robe, chin high, eyes forward, voice level as ever. Because her power didn't come from revenge, it came from resilience. Inside courtroom 4B, a new energy moved. Attorneys stood straighter. Bailiffs made eye contact. Even the defendants, many from neighborhoods where judges weren't seen as protectors, seemed to listen harder when she spoke. Because word had spread. Not just about the scandal, about how she handled it, without raising her voice, without breaking, without becoming what they wanted her to become. Angry, erratic, bitter. Instead, she stood on fact and let the truth walk beside her in silence. One afternoon, just after recess, she found a note slipped under her office door. No envelope, no signature, just 3 sentences, printed in clear block font. You didn't flinch. We saw everything. Because of you, I reapplied for the bar. She held the note in her palm for a long time, then folded it and placed it inside the inner pocket of her hoodie, right over her heart. At the state bar conference a week later, she gave the keynote. They didn't expect her to accept, but she did. She walked to the podium in a long black dress, robe over her shoulders, hoodie peeking out from beneath the collar, like a quiet protest stitched in cotton. And when she spoke, she didn't talk about scandal. She didn't talk about Aldridge, or Harlan, or the anonymous smear campaigns. She talked about legacy, about how law without accountability is just decorum dressed in decay, about how integrity isn't a performance. It's a decision made again and again in the quiet moments no one sees. And she closed with this. The law is not a mirror. It's a lens. It shows us what we fear, and it shows us who we trust. And if the sight of a black woman in a hoodie makes you question justice, then maybe justice has been wearing the wrong uniform all along. The room rose to their feet, slowly, deliberately, not out of politeness, out of recognition. That night on the drive home, she and Arthur rode in silence. The city passed by like a memory, familiar, but never soft. Rain tapped against the windows. Arthur finally spoke. You rewrote the rules, he said. Autumn smiled faintly. No, I just made them read the fine print. When they reached the house, Arthur paused on the porch. You know this isn't the end, right? She nodded. It never is. He put a hand on her shoulder. I'll be around when it starts again. Inside, her inbox was full. Congratulations, invitations, interview requests, even 2 book deals. She replied to none of them. Instead, she opened a folder on her desktop titled, The Girl in the Park. Inside, a letter of recommendation, addressed to Harvard Law, for a student named Zariah Ellison. The same girl who had stood with a phone in her hand while Autumn was cuffed, who had testified in a courtroom with her silence, who had taken a moment of humiliation and turned it into movement. Autumn hit send, then leaned back in her chair and exhaled, not in relief, but in readiness, because while they had fallen, she had risen and stayed. The courthouse was quiet that morning, not the kind of quiet that comes from absence, but the kind that settles when a place starts remembering its own purpose. There were no protests outside, no reporters waiting by the steps, no hidden cameras, no graffiti, just cold air, old stone, and the rhythm of law humming through hallways that, for once, didn't feel hostile. Autumn Mason stood in her chambers, pouring tea from the small ceramic pot her mother had gifted her the day she got her first judicial appointment. The hoodie hung on the back of her chair, still folded, still present, still unapologetically hers. That afternoon she had a case. Nothing controversial, nothing viral. Just 2 teenage boys from the East Side charged with possession of stolen property. First-time offenders, scared, black. Their public defender was fresh out of law school, nervous, stumbling over objections, red in the face. Autumn didn't interrupt, didn't smirk. She let him finish, then leaned forward, folding her hands. Tell me, she said, why do you want me to believe they didn't know the phones were stolen? The young lawyer swallowed hard. They're just kids, Your Honor. Wrong place, wrong time. That's not a defense, she said softly. That's a circumstance. One doesn't erase the other. He paused, then nodded. You're right. Autumn turned to the boys, both barely 16, eyes darting like they were still on a sidewalk being chased. You've been given a moment, she told them. Not many people get that. The system doesn't often hand out pause buttons. But today I'm giving you one. Their heads lifted slightly. I'm not dismissing the charge, she said, but I'm delaying sentencing. You'll each do 40 hours of community service at the same library where I first studied for the bar exam. You'll file a reflection every Friday and appear back in this room in 6 weeks. She looked them both in the eye. And if you don't take that seriously, you won't just disappoint me. You'll prove every assumption they ever made about black boys in hoodies. The older of the two, Tarek, nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Autumn nodded back. Gavel down. Next case. Outside, the boy's grandmother waited. As they walked toward her, she met Autumn's eyes, tears brimming, but her posture firm. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing them. Autumn's voice was low. I was them. Back in chambers, Janine knocked once before entering. You've got visitors. Autumn looked up. Unexpected? Janine smiled. Let's call it poetic. 2 women entered. One was Zariah, the girl from the park, now with a folder in hand, hair tied back, college pin on her blazer. The other, Justice Elaine Rowe, first black woman to serve on the Colorado Supreme Court. Autumn stood. Justice Rowe, she said, shaking her hand. An honor. The honor, Rowe said, is overdue. She turned to Zariah. Tell her. Zariah inhaled deeply. I'm starting law school next fall, she said. And I've been offered a summer clerkship with the same circuit where you started. Autumn raised an eyebrow. That's big. Zariah smiled. It started with you. Autumn looked down at the folder in the girl's hands. What's that? Zariah opened it. Inside, an essay. Title, The Day a Hoodie Taught Me What Justice Looks Like. They sat together for half an hour, drinking tea, trading stories. Justice Rowe spoke of her first days on the bench in the 1980s, when male colleagues called her sweetheart and clients assumed she was the court reporter. Autumn shared her battle with Aldridge. Soraya just listened, eyes wide as if writing every word onto her heart. Before leaving, Justice Rowe placed a hand on Autumn's shoulder. "You didn't just fight back," she said. "You changed the weather." Then leaned in. "And for what it's worth, I would have worn the hoodie too." That evening, Autumn sat on the porch alone, hoodie wrapped around her like a second skin. Not for comfort, for reminder of where she came from, of who watched her now, of what it cost to carry yourself through fire without letting it melt you. She took out a pen, scribbled a note. To the girl sitting quietly in the corner, thinking no one sees her. "Wear the hoodie, say the truth, keep walking." She folded it, tucked it into the inside pocket. For the next time someone tried to forget her story. Friday brought a school visit. Jefferson High, East Denver. Autumn didn't wear the robe, didn't need to. She wore dark jeans, a cream sweater, and her hoodie, zipped halfway, sleeves rolled. The look made the teachers nervous and the students curious. They'd invited her for Justice and Community Week, expecting a polite lecture about the Constitution. What they got was different. What they got was real. She stood in front of 30 teenagers, black, brown, and brilliant, each slouched just enough to hide their curiosity. Autumn didn't start with a quote, didn't pull out a legal pad. She started with a story. "I was arrested in a park for sitting still," she said, "reading a book, wearing this hoodie." A few students straightened up. "Some people thought that made me dangerous. They didn't ask my name, didn't ask what I did for a living. They just assumed I didn't belong." She paused. Let the silence speak. Then, "I'm a judge." Now she had them. A boy in the back raised his hand. "What happened to the cops?" "They tried to take me off the bench," she said. "Said my clothing was unprofessional. Said my presence was a threat." A girl near the front whispered, "But you're still here." Autumn nodded. "That's right, I am." A hush spread across the room. Then another hand. "What made you fight back?" Autumn thought for a moment, then said softly, "Because I remembered who raised me." She told them about her mother, who cleaned houses so Autumn could study. About her father, who never missed a day of her life, even when the military called. About teachers who told her she'd never blend in enough for law school. About wearing that same hoodie into the library every weekend because she couldn't afford a coat. About the moment she realized she didn't have to blend in, she just had to show up whole. "You see," she said, voice stronger now, "the law isn't about robes, it's about people. People like you, people like me, people who get judged before we even speak." She let that hang in the air, then added, "And the only way that changes is if we stop shrinking to fit into rooms that were never built for us in the first place." One student, quiet, wiry frame, soft voice, spoke up. "What if they don't listen?" Autumn looked him in the eye. "Then you speak louder, or you speak smarter, or you speak through the work you do so well they can't ignore it. But what you don't do is disappear." He nodded slowly, and something in his shoulders relaxed. After the session, a girl stayed behind. Didn't say a word at first, just stared at the hoodie, then finally said, "I got suspended last month for wearing mine." Said it was intimidating. Autumn looked down at her own, then leaned in and whispered, "They're intimidated by what they don't understand." The girl blinked hard. Autumn smiled. "Keep wearing it. Keep earning it." That evening, Autumn returned to the courthouse, not to judge, to listen. The Bar Association had hosted a roundtable, diversity in legal leadership. There were senior judges, law partners, and a few city council members. But they all kept glancing at her, some with admiration, some with unease, because they didn't know what she'd say, or if she'd say anything at all. When the moderator called on her, the room tensed. Autumn stood slowly, took her time, looked around the room like she had all day to speak, and then she said, "I didn't survive a public takedown to make you comfortable." A few shifted in their chairs. "I didn't walk back into this courthouse every day while they called me angry, divisive, or radical, just to sit in this room and make you feel safe." She walked toward the front. "I came here to remind you that the law doesn't need more silence. It needs more sight." She tapped her temple. "If you can't see the people behind the hoodie, behind the fear, behind the assumptions, you have no business writing policy for them." "Silence," she smiled. "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to hold you accountable." Then she turned and walked out. Outside in the fading light, a young reporter caught up with her. "Judge Mason," she said breathlessly. "One question?" Autumn nodded. "What would you tell someone who says you went too far, too bold, too public, too visible?" Autumn paused, looked past her at the courthouse steps, at the people gathering there, the students watching from the sidewalk, the quiet girl in the hoodie peeking from the edge of the street. Then she turned back and said, "I didn't go too far." She zipped her hoodie up the last inch. "I went just far enough to make sure no one else has to stand alone in the middle." It was late. Past the time most lights in the courthouse shut off, past the point most judges had gone home. But Autumn Mason stayed. Some nights weren't about justice. They were about reckoning. Not for others, for herself. She sat at her desk, hoodie folded beside her files, tea cooling on the windowsill. The city hummed outside, streetlights buzzing, cars fading into the distance, the occasional siren slicing through the dark like a reminder. The world doesn't sleep just because you're tired. She opened a folder marked Correspondence Personal. Inside were printed letters, emails, notes from strangers. A girl in St. Louis who'd been arrested for loitering outside her own apartment complex. A mother in Oakland whose son was expelled for wearing a hoodie in school colors. A third-year law student in Alabama who wrote, "They told me to smile more in court. I told them I smile when justice smiles back." Autumn read each one again, slowly, then closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. This was the lesson they never taught in law school. Justice is not a clean thing. It's messy, bruised, wrapped in skin and history and voices that get interrupted mid-sentence. Justice isn't found in codes. It's found in the courage to keep showing up when the room isn't built for you. The next morning, the state announced a new initiative, the Mason Protocol, a statewide policy requiring external oversight whenever law enforcement engages in activity involving a sitting judge, elected official, or public servant to prevent politically motivated misconduct. Autumn hadn't asked for it, didn't lobby, didn't tweet, but her story moved in places even her voice couldn't reach. It wasn't just about her anymore. It never was. 2 days later, Zariah stopped by. She didn't knock, just peeked in, eyes bright. Autumn waved her in. "What's up, counselor in training?" Zariah grinned. "I got a question for you." "Shoot. What's the hardest part about holding power and still keeping your voice?" Autumn leaned back, thought for a long beat, then said, "Not mistaking the silence of others for a sign you're wrong." Zariah nodded slowly. Autumn added, "And remembering that what scares them isn't your anger, it's your calm." Zariah opened her notebook, wrote it down, then said quietly, "I'm thinking of starting a blog about law school while Black." Autumn smiled. "You thinking?" Zariah smirked. "Okay, I'm starting." That weekend, Autumn returned to the park. Same bench, same view. She brought no book this time, just herself. She sat quietly, hoodie pulled over her head, eyes scanning the pond where ducks coasted across glassy water. A couple jogged past her, didn't look twice, A group of kids played tag on the hill, laughter echoing off stone. And at the edge of the playground, a mother watched her son in a bright red hoodie climb the monkey bars. She turned, met Autumn's eyes. They exchanged a nod. No words, just history and understanding. Autumn stayed until the sky faded from blue to bruised to indigo. Then she stood, dusted off her hands and walked away. Not hurried, not hidden. Just seen, fully. Back at home, she hung the hoodie on the hook behind her door. Same place as always. And beneath it, she placed the letter from Zariah. Folded, neat. The last line read, "You didn't just wear the hoodie. You made space for the rest of us to keep it on." Autumn touched the fabric once, then turned off the light. It was the silence that felt new. Not the kind that follows scandal. Not the hush of judgment or the chill that fills a courtroom when the verdict lands. This was different. This was earned stillness. The kind that follows a long fight. The kind that only comes when every voice that tried to bury you has gone quiet. Not because they were silenced, but because they were seen through. Autumn Mason stood on her porch in the early light of morning. The city still slept, but she was wide awake, hoodie zipped halfway, mug in hand, eyes on the horizon. She hadn't ruled from the bench in 3 weeks. Her last session closed quietly, without fanfare. No ceremony, no applause. Just a docket cleared with dignity and a robe folded with care. She didn't announce her departure. She just finished what she started, because that's how you walk away when your purpose was never applause to begin with. People had asked, what would she do next? Run for office? Write a book? Launch a movement? Autumn smiled at each question. Politely but truthfully, she didn't want to lead headlines. She wanted to light paths. That morning she drove across town, not to the courthouse, not to City Hall, to a high school on the edge of the city, Kennedy Prep. Zariah had called. The school had started a civic mentorship program. 10 students, mostly kids of color. First-generation dreamers, some barely holding on. Zariah was running it now, and she asked Autumn if she'd show up. No speech, no panel, just be present. So she came, in jeans, in her hoodie. The library was cramped, the tables mismatched, one overhead bulb flickering like it couldn't decide whether to give up. 10 students sat waiting. One girl whispered, "She really wore the hoodie." Autumn grinned, then took a seat. They didn't ask about the arrest. They didn't ask about the headlines. They asked about real things. What do you do when a teacher calls you too aggressive just for asking questions? What do you say when your cousin gets stopped by the cops for the 3rd time in a month? How do you know when to speak and when to stay silent? Autumn didn't give easy answers. She asked questions back. She turned the conversation from defense to dignity, and slowly the room changed, from classroom to council, from lecture to legacy. At the end, one boy lingered. Tight curls, deep dimples, maybe 14. "You're not what I thought," he said. "Oh?" Autumn smiled. "I thought judges were like statues. Cold, big words, boring." She laughed. "And now? You're like a hoodie with a heartbeat." She laughed again. Full, open, real. Best compliment I've had all year. As the students filtered out, Zariah walked over. "Still got that fire," she said. Autumn looked down at the table where the students had been. "No," she said, "they do." Then stood and walked out. No robe, no stage. Just the quiet hum of power carried forward. It rained that evening. One of those soft Denver drizzles that didn't ask for umbrellas. Just silence. Autumn Mason drove without music, hands steady on the wheel, hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows. She wasn't headed anywhere in particular, but her path took her through places that mattered. The East Side grocery store where her mom used to work night shifts. The corner where her dad once broke up a fight without raising his voice. The bus stop where she used to read bar prep questions by lamplight, hoping the cold would keep her focused. She slowed as she passed them, not because she missed the struggle, but because she understood what it had given her. She pulled over near Fuller Park. A new mural stretched across the brick wall of the old rec center. Fresh paint, clean lines, and at the center of it, her. Not a portrait exactly, but the shape was unmistakable. A black woman in a hoodie, seated on a courtroom bench made of open books, her gavel resting not on a desk, but on her lap, like something earned, not assigned. Autumn stepped out into the mist and walked closer. At the bottom, in silver spray paint, "We don't need permission to be the system. We just need space." No signature, but she didn't need one. She felt the fingerprints in every brushstroke. A teenage boy on a bike rode by, glanced at her, then back at the mural. He slowed, circled around, then stopped. "You're her," he said, not as a question, but like someone saying it out loud just to believe it. Autumn nodded. "I am." He looked at the painting, then back at her. "I thought you'd be taller." She smiled. "I thought I'd be invisible forever." The boy blinked, then smiled back. "Guess we both wrong." They stood together for a moment, watching the mural under the light drizzle. "I want to be a lawyer," he said quietly. "Not like TV lawyers, real ones, like the kind that scares people a little." "Good," she said, "but make sure the fear comes from how much truth you carry, not how loud you talk." He nodded, then biked away, Hoodie fluttering behind him like a flag. Back in her car, Autumn checked her phone. One new message, unknown number, no name. Just 5 words. "Still walking in your path." Attached was a photo, another courtroom, another black woman, wearing a hoodie under her robe, standing behind the bench, smiling. Autumn closed her eyes. Let the weight of the moment settle. Not heavy, but warm. Like an old blanket she thought she'd lost. At home she lit a candle in the front room, the kind her mother used to burn on Sunday nights. Then she reached for the folded piece of paper she kept in the pocket of her favorite hoodie, unfolded it, read it again. To the girl sitting quietly in the corner, thinking no one sees her. "Wear the hoodie. Say the truth. Keep walking." She placed it in a small wooden box. Beside it, she added a second note, blank, waiting for someone else to fill it. Sunday morning came quiet and gold. The kind of day that felt like a full exhale. No alarms, no hearings, no headlines. Just the world waking up slowly, like it finally understood the pace of healing. Autumn Mason stood in front of her closet. The hoodie hung where it always had, on the same hook since the day she folded it after that first hearing. Frayed at the cuffs now, a bit faded in the sleeves, but soft, familiar, like skin she'd grown into. She reached for it, pulled it over her shoulders, and breathed. She walked to the corner cafe, not for coffee, for the rhythm, the ritual, the simple act of showing up where she was, once unwelcome, and being undeniably seen. The barista, a young Latina woman, looked up from the register and lit up. "Judge Mason. Just Autumn now," she said with a small smile. "Then I'll put that on the cup." They shared a laugh. The room didn't hush. It just accepted her, hoodie and all, as part of its fabric. Progress didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it came in the form of a name spoken without fear. On her way out, she passed a bulletin board by the window. Flyers and posters overlapped like memories. One caught her eye. Community Legal Workshop, free clinics every Saturday. Hosted by Justice in Sneakers. Lead facilitator, Zeed Ellison, 1L, Harvard Law. A contact number was printed at the bottom. Autumn smiled, didn't call it, just tucked the image into her heart. Because some seeds don't need tending. They just need permission. That afternoon, she walked the long path to the park. Same one from the beginning. The one where it all started. She found her bench. Worn now, but sturdy. She sat down, hoodie up, hands in her lap. No cuffs, no fear. Just peace. Across the pond, a group of girls chased each other, shrieking with joy. One of them tripped, fell, and laughed so hard she snorted. Autumn chuckled. From the far path, a young black couple passed with a stroller. The baby was asleep. The mother smiled at Autumn. "I remember you," she said. "You changed everything." Autumn didn't correct her, didn't say I didn't do it alone, didn't say I was just one voice. Because sometimes silence is the best way to let others speak louder. As the sky darkened and the trees cast long shadows, Autumn stood, turned once to look at the bench, then kept walking, hands in her pockets, head high, hoodie up. No spotlight, no crowd, no robe, just a woman walking through her city like it finally knew her name. Because this story wasn't about her winning, it was about her enduring, refusing to bend, refusing to bow, and making room for the next woman, the next hoodie, the next quiet act of rebellion to feel a little less alone. Autumn Mason disappeared into the dusk, and the hoodie, it walked on. She didn't slam the door. She didn't flip the table. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood. She folded her robe. She zipped up her hoodie. And she walked out of that courtroom like it was never theirs to begin with. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep walking when they expect you to crawl. This wasn't just a story about a hoodie. It was about what happens when a black woman refuses to fit into their version of the narrative. It was about dignity, control, and choosing silence not as surrender, but as strategy. Because not all stories shout, some whisper, and the quiet ones, they stay with you longer. So if this story moves something in you, if you saw yourself in that courtroom, if you've ever been overlooked, second-guessed, or talked over just because of your hoodie, your blackness, or your presence, then this story was for you, and it doesn't end here. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories for more stories that speak when the world gets too loud. Hit the bell because we don't publish noise. We publish truth. Drop a comment and share what this story meant to you. You never know who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who's fighting their own silent battle and remind them they're not alone. Because this isn't just entertainment, this is real life told through real weight. And out here, the hoodie still walks.